In this video, we're going to be using simple line and wash techniques, just a couple of fine liners, a handful of paints and one brush to create a really lovely village scene from Suffolk in the UK. So I've got a 0.3 and a 0.7mm fine liner, fine but bolder lines. Alongside that, I've got my normal set of colours, got a little bit of tissue off to one side, and I've got two brushes, but I think realistically we're just going to be using this, a sword liner brush. This is actually a lovely Da Vinci brush. It's a synthetic and it's got a really nice, well, it's a travel brush, but it's got a really nice screw mechanism, which is pretty rare in travel brushes. That enables you to really have a secure fit, a nice safe brush, and it's one I've been using out and about sketching recently now that the weather's started to improve. With that, let's just start. I've got a big sheet of paper here, but we're going to be focusing very much in the middle of this, and when I'm done I'll probably chop the edges off, and I've got a lovely kind of postcard style sketch to use, something a little like this one up here, which I rather like. All we're going to do is the normal processes. So step one, we look at the key shapes. So we've got here this sort of key building. This is probably the main focal point, isn't it? And we're going to focus on not just the shape but the texture of that shape. So as we build in different lines, we're thinking, oh, what's the texture of this roof line? And we're not just doing a bold, hard, harsh line. We're building in that kind of wobbly, slightly old, slightly decrepit, sorry to the owner of this house, but it's a very slightly sort of run-down feeling house, isn't it? It's just the old sort of English village kind of way. And then we come to the next little line, this kind of edge of the roof, and we get that texture. And this way, our lines are telling us an awful lot. What we don't need to do is 100 lines to tell us that same information. Instead, we do simple lines, simplicity, which says an awful lot. And already we get this, hopefully an idea of a little cottage building up, just from simplicity, from celebrating that simplicity. There are, of course, straight lines in the world, but normally lines have a little bit of texture to them. And that texture also gives us just a little bit of leeway with mistakes and things, doesn't it? If we've not done it perfectly and we've got this textured line, it kind of hides our mistakes. And as I said to someone recently at one of my courses, I have made a career out of hiding mistakes. And I think it's a perfectly fun, acceptable way to sketch and paint and draw. Now we're kind of just building up an idea of this cottage, this house, and soon we're going to have to start building around it, aren't we? We're going to have to start using this house to build on and get the less important things in, the less sort of key areas in. And this is where we're going to start doing a little bit of comparative measurement. So measurement, scary, proportions, tedious, difficult to get right. But what we can do is we can gently sketch ourselves the key element, and in this case, for me, the key element is this house. And once we've gently got this in, we can use that as a kind of what we call an anchor measurement. So from here, if we call this done for now, and I'll finish off the bottom later, we can then go, right, where does this yellow house, where does it bisect? Well, here, this is where the roof comes in. So it comes into here, and how high does this first roof line get? It gets to just above this. So here we go. And by just comparatively measuring, we're going to get things about right. Not perfect, but perfection takes a long time, can be a bit stressful. And for me, this is a simple line and wash. Remember what we're doing. Simple line and wash. We're not creating a piece of fine art. We're creating a fun bit of line and wash. The peak of the next roof is just under the eaves here, sort of on that line of perspective really, isn't it? So we can just flow down and then get that to bisect the right point here. This is really simple. It's just really simple, easy comparative measurement. And sometimes things will go out of line. So here, look, I've got my line not quite right, and that's fine. We're going to just make do, fudge those textural lines a little bit. This is what I said about hiding mistakes. Also, it doesn't matter as much. This house is less important. So if you are worried about accuracy, well, our accuracy should be focused over here more. And we've almost finished our whole scene, really. It might not feel that way, but we almost have, because we've got our hedge Now that's not super interesting, so instead of trying to pretend it's super interesting, spend ages on it, we can just sort of pop in those little textures. Bring it down, and we can also pop in the little texture of this wall and the little textures of these plants coming up. Now we've framed what's going on in the middle of our sheet into this sort of postcard area. Next, we're going to come off to the right again, and we're going to start finishing off at the bottom here. The reason I leave the bottom finished is because often we need to sort of match things. So here, for example, we can go, right, where does the bottom need to be for this to make sense? And this house is rather squat, so we're going to have to just extend this a little bit to get it right, to get all that sort of comparative feel right. But then we can just bring this back. There's a kind of a gate here. We can just hatch in, and now look, we come forward and the bottom of this house matches the bottom of this one. There's a car here. I will pop the car in, but I'm just going to leave it as a little very simple set of shapes. Not going to try too hard to represent the actual car there, and more just get the idea that there's some kind of vehicle here. I mean, it's way off to the side, it's not that interesting. We've also got the added confusion that there's a little bit of a slope going down here. So I'm just going to mark in a loose bottom over here, bottom of that house, and move on, because this is less interesting. It's not the sort of exciting part of our scene. Still focusing on the shapes, going to move back here, find there's this little sort of black line underneath. Then we've got all this kind of chaos coming in from the garden. Very unfair on us to have to deal with all of this, but because it's chaotic, we can just be a little bit loose with our lines, you know, even looser, let's say, with our lines. Got another little wall here, and look, do you see how only the top of this black line, we can't actually see the bottom of the house until we get over here. So over here we can just about see that it's meeting the grass. Now if we'd finished off the bottom of the house straight away, if we'd actually gone in and gone, right, straight away we're going to draw the very bottom of our house, that would have been wrong. It's very tempting to do. But as well as trying to get things matched up and lined up in perspective, so all these lines are flowing towards our vanishing point over there, it's also allowed me to actually be much more true to life. We don't see the bottom of this house, so I've left it out until the end, and then we can sort of recognise how to make it feel whole without trying to invent things and draw things which aren't there. In the foreground we've got some lovely little flowers poking in, got this kind of bush, and this is all about just, again, framing, getting these lines pushing in into the middle. Same back here, we've got these kind of little trees sort of poking out, haven't we? So we can craft those little circles, little loops, that's all they are. We got fun marks we can pop in here, little chimney tops. There we are done, and we've got this scene. And actually, as a simple sketch, this is great fun. Are the proportions perfect? Absolutely not, and don't let me tell you otherwise. Now I'm going to come in with my little sword brush, and we're going to play with some of these colours. I'm actually going to start with something just obvious in the scene, which is this light yellow. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of my yellow. This is a bit of azo yellow, and just pop that in. Now if you know me, if you've seen my sort of sketching before, you will know that this is not going to be painting by numbers. We're not going to be precise about our colours, but that's the beauty of line and wash. The ink is already there giving us structure, and so we can come in here, and I call this step loose colours, because we can let these colours just flow loosely on the page. The ink is going to allow the viewer to see what we want them to see, whilst allowing us to be really free with our colours. Now this house is basically white. So I'm going to just find the shadows, and actually there's quite a lot of shadow. This scene as a photograph is quite badly lit, and we can make the most of that with our painting. So instead of washing over this, I can actually just come in and look at all these little brick textures. I can just kind of dot and dash and move, and in other places apply a bit more of a consistent wash, and in other places just get this kind of pebble dashed feel going on. Above that, I'll add a bit more warmth to this wash, that kind of deeper, it's a fairly neutral but very slightly warm, I think, it might just be my screen, but fairly warm set of tiles. So I'll get that feeling in here. And then down the side, we actually have a kind of stained area, a bit where the paint and things is all broken off. So I'm going to get that feeling. And by dragging these marks down, you're kind of hopefully getting this mixing of colour, but also this feel of things being a bit fluid, a bit old, a bit decrepit, not just perfectly painted or something like that. Using a bit of indigo now to mark in some of the darker shadows. But remember, this is our loose colours. We're not looking at the moment to do more than paint in an idea of some of the values, but not going to get this darkest values. And mostly what we're trying to do is just paint the light and the initial loose textures. We don't want to overdo things yet. This door will get a punch of colour. Now, one thing I always say, you see how this now stands out so much because it's the only area with that colour in. So all I'm going to do to remedy that is just even a couple of splashes in a couple of places. Just get that colour moving somewhere else. I've got some greens, so I'm going to get a little bit of... Oh, actually what I'll do is clean this area of my palette out. And I might just mix some green. So I'll get some yellow, and I'll use that same blue from the door, and that will give us, so this is not phthalo blue, it's a manganese blue hue. And that gives this kind of vivid green when you mix it with a light yellow. And that vivid green will do really nicely just in quite a few places actually, won't it? There's lots of places where we've got nice touches of green in this scene. Remember, this is just the light, loose colours, and you can decide how far you want to take them, but I would really recommend not overdoing it, not trying to be too specific. Just mixed a little bit more yellow in, and also a little bit more of this kind of red from the back of my palette, and that gives us a slightly more sap green like colour. You see how that's getting a nice bit of, well, for me, a nice bit of variety through the scene. A few splashes to cheat as well, cheat our way to some texture without having to paint. And I think this road we can just suggest with a little bit more there. And again, a few splashes for texture. Had a video recently out, if you want to look at more about splashing technique, I've got a video specifically about how to splash and why to splash. You'll find that on my channel. Here we go. I'm just going to start adding a bit more shadow. Things are dry in places, so I'm sort of just coming in with what I normally call bold colours in places, little bits of extra tone. Splashing into the sky is a nice way I find to start the sky, and then I'll come in with lots of water. And I can just kind of join those dots up, and then we get this fluid, gentle feeling sky. And there we go. That will be step 2 done, the loose colours, which can now dry. And when they are dry, we can come in with our bold colours and our little finishing touches with perhaps our bold ink in places, touches of really bright colour. We'll see what we do. And here we go, pretty much dry. So what I'm going to do now, as we said, is come in with some slightly bolder colours. And this is where we can start picking out shadows, making interesting highlights and things like that. So for one, we might go, you know what, there's actually got a bit of shadow on these houses. We're also going to artistically add our own sort of punch. So I'm choosing where I put the shadows. Not everywhere there is shadows, but everywhere I want shadows as well. And that will do for me, I think, just a little bit of yellow and orange over there. Then I'm going to come in with this same yellow and just find some of these little flowers we talked about earlier. And we can also paint outside the lines. Remember, we've got some lines. Doesn't mean that all the yellow has to be within them. We've got some flowers here that we sort of just remember at the very beginning we put these little flower shapes in. And also little splashes can just elaborate on these. And then we can even come in with a little bit of punchy green and just join some of that together. Perhaps even looking at that, we want a bit more depth. There's quite a lot of darkness in and amongst these flowers. So getting a little bit more darkness, especially since this is our foreground, where we want the brightest and boldest colours. Now let's keep using this dark. Now we've got this dark, we will use it as we're in a sort of dark mood, a dark place. Oh, that sounded very very chilling almost, didn't it? So with this dark, I'm just going to move around and apply a little bit more texture and shadow where we want it again. So as I said at the beginning, this is a pretty poor photo in terms of lighting. So we've actually got an awful lot of shadow in places where we probably don't want it to be super shadowed. So instead of making this whole front of the building dark, I will just accentuate shadows onto the eaves. I'll accentuate a few of these textures, but I won't make the whole thing shadowed because I don't think that will make the best art, even if it would be more realistic. We can then apply some darker colours, so for example little punches of red, not darker but more saturated, more emphatic colours, to simulate some of that value we do have in the image, whilst also just, making it more interesting and moving away from reality but towards something fun and something which is a better piece of art for us. It doesn't have to be better for everyone, but better for us. In, for example, the roof, I might just add a bit more of that warmth that we were talking about. And I'm not saying this level of warmth is in the roof, but I'm starting to sort of craft the scene into something that I want it to be. In the very foreground, we've got this kind of road-like texture coming around. And I think what I'll do is just give a tiny bit more depth to the curb shadow and find some of these little black areas at the bottom of the house as well, and real bits of darkness in some of these windows. And to be honest, that's probably all we need to do for this, a quick and simple line and wash. So that's our bold colours done. Just need to let them dry again, and we will see how the structure can come back a little bit by using our ink again. And here we are pretty much dry. We're touch dry in the important places, and that means I'm going to come back and restructure. That means adding, for me, a little bit more ink. And we don't want to overdo it, because look, when we pop this on, I'm using the bolder pen now. When we pop it on, it's going to be a very bold line. What we really don't want to do is come and just pop a really strict bold line everywhere, because if we do that, we will lose the kind of looseness and the magic. It'll become like a sort of Art Deco poster or a really illustrative poster. Not necessarily a bad thing, but not in keeping with the style and what we've been trying to achieve the rest of the time. So little touches of ink, finding those key lines, but trying to leave some things, still to the imagination. Key shadows do really well with a bit of extra bold line. Key textures do really well if we just sort of come in here and underscore some of our texture marks. That should hopefully give us a nice boost. It brings that house forward, and that's what bold lines do. They bring things forward. Here we can bring the kind of foreground into the front simply by adding more of these sort of chaotic lines. We said there was a sort of chaotic jumble of plants and things covering the front of the house, and we can just show that a bit more. These flowers here that we painted without lines, we can add little lines to some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. And you can try it all if you want, but for me it seems most effective when you just have a few suggestions and a few bits of looseness. So the same here as well. Now we've got this nice kind of symmetry working across for us as well. Coming round, I think this road could do with a few marks, because now by showing these kind of horizontal marks and bringing them round with the curvature of the road, for me, those kind of little touches fill in the space, and they show kind of what's going on. They show you the perspective of the scene. And even just connecting this side of the road might be a good idea with that in mind as well. Don't want to overdo it though, so let's just take a step back and think, what else could we do? What else could we reasonably do? Well, I think the other bit which could be nice to do would just be in these details, in these windows. There's quite a lot of darkness, there's quite a lot of depth. They're just a little bold line here and there. Not everywhere, again, just simple little touches, little texture perhaps on top of there. And maybe we can also introduce these little wooden struts down. These are the kind of little details that you don't need to add at the beginning, but finding them later, finding them at the very end even, when you know what the rest of the sketch can take, how much extra detail it can take. That's a nice way of doing it. I'm going to put my initials on there. I like to sign somewhere sneaky in the sketch as well. And we can have a look. Is there anything else we need to add? So for the finishing touches, you might add little touches of ink. You might add really super bright and bold colours. For this, it's a delicate little village scene, and I'm going to actually leave it be. If you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy these other videos as an example, and you can join me on sketchloose.co.uk for in-depth tutorials and courses. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.